Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, third part of the 2nd of May 2024. Sorry, I'm discombobulated. I've been out and voted, and for what it's worth, my vote won't be worth anything in the area that I live in, as it never is around here. There's no chance I didn't even know who I was going to vote for, actually, going to the polling booth. It's local elections, just councillor elections. But still, I didn't know who I was going to vote for because it's anyone but them. And actually trying to work out who's got the most chance here. And the simple fact is no one's got a chance. First past the post voting system means that literally there's no point in me going to vote. I feel completely disenfranchised, which is why I campaigned for the alternative vote system back in 2010 or whenever it was. Anyway, whatever, I voted, which is great. I have the right to do that. It's a civic duty and I've done it. Okay. Apple authorized service centers in Russia and they have run out the Apple authorized service centers in Russia have run out of original components. Parts for repairing iPhones and MacBooks are no longer available in Apple authorized service centers. Components began to disappear since last summer, and in February this year, the American company completely stopped supplying them. At the same time, Apple service centers still continue to work. Once such centers receive the manufacturer's permission, but whether they have them now is unknown. A representative of one of those centers added that iPhone 14 and 15 are no longer serviced in Russia. Now they will have to bring to Russia either only Chinese parts or disassemble the old devices in order to repair the new ones. So good news that Apple is not sort of trying to get round, it appears anyway, loopholes and help out their Russian market there, but they are basically, the Russian market is left to its own devices with regard to its Apple devices. Okay, Patrick Fox here says about, oh my goodness, so this is Mearsheimer, he's a realist, what's known as a geopolitical realist here, essentially an appeaser of Russia, and he's someone that's often touted by the likes of David Sachs, etc. Anyone who wants the pro-Russian point of view will go to someone like Mearsheimer. Quote, if you look at, this was him in an interview with Piers Morgan, John Mearsheimer. If you look at how the Soviets, who were basically responsible for defeating the Nazis in World War II, there's an interesting discussion around that. Anyway, they did not commit many war crimes in the process of defeating the Wehrmacht. I don't know what he's trying to say here. Soviets didn't. Oh, they're okay because they didn't commit many war crimes. Okay. Anyway, as Patrick Fox here says, well, Bloodlands, which is Timothy Snyder's 2010 book, I haven't read that and I do want to read it, specifically refutes this nonsense. Snyder's work is hardly the only one on the subject, but it's pretty thorough accounting of the atrocities committed by both sides in what became the Eastern Front of the ETO during World War II. Mearsheimer's descent into whitewashing the lengthy Soviet atrocities committed during the war is simply unsupportable by the facts available. It is made even more egregious, if that's possible, by his previous denunciations of Allied strategic bombing efforts in the same conflict, a deeply unserious and ahistorical response all round. Essentially, Mearsheimer isn't really worth listening to, is the TLDR of that. The US imposed new sanctions on May the 1st against nearly 300 companies and individuals in Russia and third countries, including Chinese companies, for aiding Moscow's war effort, the Treasury Department said. It's really interesting. Ben Hodges said something along the lines of recently, this is just as important as providing, missiles to Ukraine. This is such an important part of the war that I know sanctions aren't perfect, and things like the oil price cap has now been rendered rather impotent. They are a massively important part of making life difficult for Russia in order to continue prosecuting their war. So it's really good news that the US is still big on that. The big question is, you can impose sanctions. How effective is everyone in enforcing those sanctions? Anyway. Right, moving on, starting on America there, just a little bit more on America, because there's this interesting situation that's come out where Marjorie Taylor Greene has then made a move to vacate the chair of Mike Johnson. This is all to do with the military aid package that he got through basically by putting that to the floor to vote. And actually, when you look back on both the Senate, particularly the Senate vote, but also the House of Representatives, someone's rightfully saying, even though half the Republicans didn't vote for the package, it still had overwhelming support, like 3/4 support. That is an incredibly good bipartisan agreement there. We must remember that Congress has overwhelmingly supported the aid package to Ukraine and the other packages as well. Anyway, she's moved to vacate his seat. She had a speech where it was great. I'm gonna find this to you because it was absolutely delightful. Because someone mentioned this in my thread the other day. Now, the other day, I talked about an Australian phrase. I said, hit me with your phrases that you use local to where you are from. And someone said, look, we use the phrase, bless your heart, which I've heard many times, used in the southern parts of US to basically denigrate someone really politely. But when you say, oh, bless your heart or bless her heart, it means they're an absolute douche. And anyway, this is what on News Nation Mike Johnson said, and he said it twice. Brilliant.
Let's talk about your future.
Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Mm-hmm.
No fan of yours.
Bless her heart. Yeah.
Bless her heart. Bless her heart. And he goes on and basically gives her a hard time. She then comes back and does a press conference saying she's going to vacate his seat pretty much in response to this. And then she holds up a cap, MUGA, which is Make Ukraine Great Again, which is supposed to be a dig at, it's all about helping out Ukraine and that military aid package that went to Ukraine. And then people are like, yeah, that's a pretty cool cap. Yeah, that's a pretty good idea. I've seen some like maps of like make Ukraine great again and make it like bigger, having historical like parts of Russia and stuff. Anyway, so this is all going on. And you've got Democrats in America who are looking to support Mike Johnson, at least at the moment, because they'd rather something happens in Congress, that they're able to get bipartisan work done, which is more likely with Mike Johnson at the helm rather than going through another period of trying to get another speaker elected. So it's all basically going a bit crazy with Marjorie Taylor Greene at the moment. After the Ukraine aid passed, Greene had hoped that a public backlash by Conservative constituents against Johnson would lead to a groundswell of Republicans turning on him. That did not materialise. Why I mentioned that the votes were so successful and bipartisan, even though half the Republicans didn't in the House of Representatives vote for it, it is actually far more popular than I think people like Marjorie Taylor Greene predicted. And partly because she lives in this bubble, I'm sure I've got this somewhere. The bubble that Marjorie Taylor Greene lives in means that she, I think, misinterprets how many people support her, because online it's probably an awful lot of trolls who end up supporting her, and so she gets a false sense of exactly what's going on in the actual American electorate. Yeah, I can't find it. Anyway, it was some analyst saying, or someone saying that you know, come the elections, again, I've shown you a similar one a few weeks back. Come the elections, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene might get a little bit. I don't think she will, because the district she is operating in is R plus 37 or something. But anyway, she might get a bit of a shock that actually not as many people in the American public support the kind of crazy things she's saying as she thinks. Anyway, this is her giving the old MUGA.
Yeah, that's what this is. The Uniparty is Make Ukraine Great Again. The Uniparty is all about funding every single foreign war. They think this is the business model that needs to be done. Here you go. Put that up there. Thank you. Yeah.
Well done to her. I mean, she did some trolling there. That's now become a bit of a meme. People are posting images of that cap all over the place. And I think it's backfired a little bit. But it just goes to show how much of a bogeyman helping Ukraine is for people like her. Now, what this has meant is that Hakeem Jeffries, a leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, has come out and said, we are going to support Speaker Mike Johnson. And I'll only play a little bit of what he said just here.
That have been underway ever since. Freedom under assault in America, freedom under assault across the world. particularly in Ukraine.
Freedom is under assault across the world, particularly in Ukraine. I like the fact that Ukraine is still up there with him in his thought processes and rationale.
Which is why it was so critically important that we worked together to get the national security legislation that was bipartisan and comprehensive over the finish line and defeated the pro-Putin Republicans who were determined to undermine America's national security.
And this is going to lead on to what I'm going to speak about in a minute. So he's talking about pro-Putin Republicans. So I know I have many Republican viewers out there who wouldn't see themselves like that, but there are many who do, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of them, right? And he is specifically talking about pro-Putin Republicans. This is a real issue, and there she is putting up a hat that's really taking the piss out of Ukraine. And so it's very clear where she's coming from. It's very clear to Hakeem Jeffries here, where the US needs to concern itself in terms of helping out certain countries around the world in terms of military assistance and wars that are taking place. But Marjorie Taylor Greene talks about business model to do with going around getting involved in wars, and this leads on to this next point that was made by a viewer, actually, Lloyd Miller. So thanks for this, Lloyd. I'm going to use your comment here to just as stimulus. So, Jonathan, I'm also an American, and this is when I had went through some points in a previous video that a Reagan Republican who has some differences with me, some agreements but some differences, and I fought back against him. He said, I 100% agree with your assessment in regard to US spending and European spending on defense, and Trump is wrong about the role of the US in the world. That said, as an American, I also recognize that we can't continue to be the world police force. Europe and the free nations of the Pacific areas have to step up. Defense for freedom in the world has to be a team effort. This strategy probably will require some new defense treaties. This is a really interesting topic of discussion, and I sort of agree with him. Like, I loved Team America World Police, right? The old South Park makers and doing that film, and it just absolutely spoke to me because there is this sense that America see themselves as the world police. However, I have a more nuanced approach now that goes against what I previously thought, and that is America doesn't go around doing moral policing, but they might appear to be doing that. America goes around, and other nations with them, so the UK does this, goes around getting involved where it is strategically beneficial for them to do so, or at least that's the calculation they make each time. So, and then they can dress it up as doing policing, doing the moral thing, but it's almost certainly never that. Even with Ukraine, and I've argued this before, I'm going to repeat myself again. This is so important to understanding what goes on in the world. Right, so when the US went into Iraq, there were certainly contracts that they were waiting to give out to their hydrocarbons industry with regard to the huge oil reserves that are there. Kuwait, Gulf 1 and Gulf 2. Kuwait and Iraq, why did the US get involved there? Weapons of mass destruction, moral dimension of a dictator. Yeah, why didn't you get involved in Zimbabwe? Why not there with Robert Mugabe? So you had Saddam Hussein, yep, took him out of the equation. Okay, now it's all about oil, possibly, or that was the intention, and they didn't really do a very good job of sorting out afterwards, but okay, why get involved in Libya? Hydrocarbons. Why not Zimbabwe? Nothing to offer you. And the UK, that's the same with the UK, by the way. So this is not an anti-US thing. In fact, I'm defending US's international strategy here. I'm not trying to be a war hawk, but I'm trying to explain to you that there is no such thing as a free lunch. So when we look at what the US and other nations do around the world, and we say, oh, they're going around trying to police the world. They are not. They're going around getting involved in places which give them a return on investment. And it is a sense of policing where it is where it is useful for them to police, but not policing everywhere. There are certain places that the US don't get too involved in. Now, Afghanistan became something to do with the war on terror, and that was getting involved in a place and then realizing that, oh my goodness, this isn't really working for us. And you could do the sunk cost fallacy, which is you stay there forever because you've already spent this much in being in Afghanistan. But eventually, they overcame that and said, right, we need to pull out. And they did the Doha deal, pulled out, and it was all a bit of a disaster. But because they worked out that it was not paying them to do that. So the costs of being in Afghanistan were not worth the benefits they were getting from being there. They never went into Zimbabwe because the cost-benefit analysis didn't work. They did do Libya. They're getting involved with Syria for geopolitical strategic reasons, but you could argue about oil reserve or hydrocarbons and resources as well. Iraq, etc., etc. Things like the Red Sea being super important for trade and areas around there. So Houthis, taking out Houthi rebels is to do with clearing trade paths throughout the world. So I don't think the US ever goes into places from a moral point of view, and by US I mean any nation. And when they do, it's because it's also strategically important. So Ukraine is a great example, right? If Ukraine wasn't so vital strategically to NATO, to the Western hegemony, to trade with its natural resources, with everything, if it was somewhere like Georgia previously, why didn't we get involved in Georgia in 2008 and whenever? Why didn't we get involved in Chechnya? Why did we get involved in Ukraine? So you can't have everything. So they aren't the world police going around everywhere sorting out everyone's problems because it's the right thing to do. They go and sort out some problems that happen to be the right thing to do, but underlying that, it's because it's strategically vital that they do so. So the great thing about Ukraine, from a Ukrainian point of view, is that I think it's morally obligatory for us to do this, but it is underwritten by it's also strategically important for us to do this, which is why I always talk about the benefits of helping Ukraine for us, right? For the UK, for the EU, for the US. And it's all to do with that chess game we're having with China and Russia and North Korea and Iran involved in that chess game. And we are involved supporting Ukraine. So hopefully that goes some way to giving you some context to why I think it's important that we're doing what we're doing, and also going forward into some of these bits and pieces I'm going to talk about now, which is in Niger, after the government encouraged the population to rise up against American colonialism, they're now proudly flying flags of Russia in real neo-imperialist. Leaders can enrich themselves, but let's see how the country's people fare. So here's an interesting situation where the US has pulled out of a number of places, and the French in the Sahel region of Africa. And again, it's going to be a cost-benefit analysis. Now, we can disagree with them pulling out. They shouldn't have done that, or they should have done that. I don't know enough about the region to be able to cast my evaluation at all. But obviously, the Americans have said it is not worth us being here. Now, you can bet they weren't there because of world police, or if it was policing for the benefit of the US. So it's to do with terror. So keeping an eye on Islamic terrorism so that doesn't spread to places where it's more meaningful for the US. You can have your Islamic terrorism in Africa, keep it there, fair enough, says maybe some Americans. And this is, I'm not picking on America. This is kind of like, I'm actually just trying to explain. There's no having a go here, because this is the same for the UK, this is the same for France, right? We're going to pull out because actually you guys can get on with that. We feel that we are not going to be threatened enough by anything that happens here, or the return on investment of us being here is simply not worth it. So they pull out, and that's what's happening. Now, here we have, and from the other point of view, Export-Import Bank of the United States, EXIM, has approved a 15-year loan of $156.6 million, which Ukrzalincia will use to, that's the Ukrainian Railways, purchase 40 Wabtec diesel locomotives This will provide 800 jobs for Wabtec employees in Pennsylvania and indirectly support the railway supply chain in both the US and Ukraine. This is on top of the 2018 agreement between the Ukrainian Railways and GE Transportation, now part of Wabtec, which covers the supply of up to 225 new diesel locomotives and the overhaul of 75 existing vehicles, and is financed by Ukrexim Bank, a Ukrainian state-owned bank. To date, 33.3 megawatt CE 33 AC locomotives have been delivered under the firm part of this agreement. The rolling stock has a 10% level of localization because the final assembly is performed at the facilities of the Kharkiv Railway Car Building Works. In 2019, the parties signed an MOU for the delivery of 40 TE 33 AC diesel locomotives in addition to the 2018 framework. Blah, 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 blah. Why I've chosen to talk about this here is, we've got money going from the US, being loaned, in this case, from the US to Ukraine, but there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? So when the US give aid to Ukraine, like that $61 billion package, and when the UK gives aid, and when Germany gives aid, and when France gives aid, and when the EU gives aid, it's because they know it's in their strategic interests, both from a geopolitical point of view, but often from an economic point of view. Here we have money going from the US that then goes back to the US. So it goes, you can have this, by the way, Ukraine, but you need to spend it over here, so we'll have that back. Thank you very much. Oh, and here's a load of jobs for our Pennsylvanian people and the supply chains involved there. And what you're doing is you're offering a stimulus to your own country, but also doing the right moral and geopolitical strategic thing for Ukraine. So they get what they need, they get support, they get a bunch of new equipment, and you get a load of jobs and blah, blah, blah. And you get that money back because in this case, it's a loan. And so it goes back to this idea that the US aren't world policing, although I think sometimes it's kind of sold as that, and the more cynical of us, including myself, will often see it like that. But in reality, that is a post hoc rationalization of the strategic work that's actually going on. So there is no such thing as a free lunch. And a free lunch in this case is going around policing people, costing you money in policing the world. So I would just say back to you, man, here, and thank you so much. This is a really interesting comment, that they aren't going around the world doing moral duties for the benefit of the world. Any action that nations do will be for the benefit of themselves. Occasionally there'll be moral activity like helping out a nation that has been absolutely done over by a natural disaster, for example, and you send over loads of stuff, you send help, but part of that is to do with moral reciprocity. So you want that to be reciprocated to you. So you scratch my back, I'll scratch I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. So there's that element that that you can argue. You can have moral discussions about whether there is such a thing as altruism, which is doing something for the benefit of someone else to the cost of yourself. Actually, you can argue that there's no such thing, that we're always kind of investing in ourselves by being nice to other people, so in the hope that it gets returned to us, etc., etc. That's a very cynical look at humanity, and I think we do have moral intuitions and so on and so forth. But you can argue that they themselves have been evolved into us because they beget benefits, such as I scratch your back, you scratch mine. But anyway, there are those elements where we'll help another nation charitably because they've been hit by earthquakes, but also I bet you'll find that there'll be certain nations. Say you had like 5 nations that had an earthquake over the last 20 years, you'll probably find that you help one of those nations a little bit more because it's slightly more strategically beneficial for you to do so. I wonder if stuff like that goes on. So again, this is really cynical look at the world that I'm having here, but it's the realpolitik of the world, which is you have finite amount of resources. You aren't going to spank your resources on just being continually charitable to the world. The US is not in the business of going around the world just being nice to everyone for the sake of being nice to everyone, or policing everyone for the sake of keeping the world secure. If they are doing that, it's keeping the world secure because it benefits the US to have a secure world economically. Security brings about economic security and economic stability. Anyway, there you go. And indeed, we can take that on to look at what's going on out in the is it the South China Sea near the Philippines here? So here we have a Filipino vessel here being pretty much rammed by a Chinese Coast Guard ship, and they fire a water cannon at it, and you can see they're actually purposefully going at the most expensive comms part of this, satellite and comms of this Filipino ship. Imagine a French vessel sailing close to Dover on the south coast of the UK and attacking a British Coast Guard ship, ramming it and deliberately destroying its radar and injuring personnel with a water cannon. That's what the Chinese aggressors just did in the Philippines. When is enough enough? And they're continually doing this. This is not the first time. This has happened a lot recently. Then incredible footage, Chinese PLA Navy spy ship 600 yards from a US Navy amphibious warship, USS Harper's Ferry, captured from a Philippine vessel as part of its assertive transparency campaign to expose Beijing's aggression and expansion in the region. And then we have machine guns being fired here and all sorts of going on. These are exercises going on, but all next to each other. There's a lot of flexing going on here. And here we have Ian Ellis talking about China's surging ships in the South China Sea, spying and shadowing in Philippine territory, sending aircraft and stationing warships around Taiwan. Beijing could ramp up military activity before or after Taiwan's presidential inauguration on the 20th of May. So we have a map of what's going on there with all the ships involved. As we enter summer exercise season, when cross-strait weather is ideal for military operations, there's significant firepower in the region. So talking about US firepower, US Navy assets in the Indo-Pacific. And again, this isn't the US doing world policing. This is the US flexing and trying to establish power centers around the world for their benefit, right? Then again, in answer to David Hess this morning, asking not in that, it was Donald Trump yesterday in the Time article saying South Korea need to pay more for us being there. The US aren't in South Korea just for the benefit of the South Koreans, right? The US are in South Korea for hugely important geopolitical reasons, right? And this is all part of it, which is the ongoing, we've moved from a Cold War US-Russia thing to now China being the number one competitor. And so the US have their naval and military assets strategically placed around the Indo-Pacific for that reason. So Trump saying stuff like, South Korea need to pay more, just to me is deeply ignorant of just international geopolitics. Just don't say stuff if you don't know much about it. And I'm no massive expert on this, by the way, but it's just common sense that the US aren't going to be spending a ton of money on stuff for shits and giggles, right? It's just not what you do. Like, everything is spent for a reason, and it's spent hoping that there's an adequate return on investment. And at some point, it may be that nations aren't pulling their weight, and they do have to, like Europe over the last 20 years with NATO, you need to pay more for your defense, but that means that the US then becomes less important to and for Europe. So, there are pros and cons to all these things. Anyway, just lots of tracking of what's going on in the Indo-Pacific, around Taiwan here, tracking Chinese military activity there, updated maps, what's been going on in February around Taiwan, and then in March, Chinese PLA activity, blah, blah, blah. The standoff in the South China Sea continues to develop, with both sides dug in as China instigated a series of unfortunate events beginning in early March. Filipino sailors injured for the first time as a result of China's illegal attempt to enforce a peacetime blockade at Second Thomas Shoal. China dual water cannons a Philippine boat and injures another 3 Filipino sailors. Philippine president promises a proportionate response and says Filipinos do not yield. Remember, US is aligned very much with the Philippines. 25 Chinese vessels swarm Scarborough Shoal and shadow a survey ship. And China launched a series of military exercises, amphibious operations, and joint combat patrols. And then, of course, you've got that latest kind of attack on the Filipino vessel there. And then, as he says here, yesterday at Scarborough Shoal, the this Filipino vessel getting a hard time by the Chinese Coast Guard. The Philippines and US kicked off their premier annual military exercise Balikatan 2024 last week in response to China's surge ships to the South China Sea in a move described as out of the norm. Balikatan is Tagalog, which is a language, local language for shoulder to shoulder, has been covered in detail elsewhere, but it's a 39th iteration, 3 weeks long, premier annual military exercise, 17,000 American, Philippine, Australian and French personnel involved. This isn't the US doing police work, right? Philippine warships, including BRP Davao del Sur, Ramon Alcaraz, and Antonio Luna, USS Somerset and USS Harper's Ferry participating. High-end coastal defense activities, including counter-landing and sinking exercises, several landmark achievements, including the first launch of an anti-ship missile from a Philippine Navy warship and Air Force's surface-to-air missiles. So this is about tooling up the Philippine Navy. Why? Because it's in the strategic interest of the US to do so. In the same way that supporting the Ukraine is in the US strategic interest to do so. This is also when we, as I said earlier, when we talk about the US saying, oh, you know, everyone else needs to pay more, that may be, this is, and if you're the sort of person that's going to say, and this is Europe's war or Europe's issue, you'll just be hugely wrong. Ukraine is well in the wheelhouse of the US administration in terms of their geopolitical strategies and objectives. And so it's just, that's why the US is and should be spending money, and probably would be spending more money if certain Republicans weren't so ignorant about geopolitics, right? But the problem is, you know, you've got China now building more ships. Like the scale of the shipbuilding in China is frightening, and they are building it than some big old pieces of kit like this new advanced aircraft carrier, the Fujian, which is just I think getting underway for the first time. So yeah, that's what's going on in the Indo-Pacific, but it's all going to be connected to Ukraine via various means, and it's all part of this, like I keep saying, game of 4D chess that we are playing. We're all involved in, all our countries are involved in to some degree or another. Right, then we go to see what's happening in Georgia, and we look at, well, what's going on there. Why didn't we get involved there as we did in Ukraine previously? But I think Georgia is becoming more and more of a place where I think we do have a really good vested interest, especially now that Russia is flexed so much and there's almost outright war against Western nations in terms of cyber warfare, in terms of information warfare, and of course the actual warfare on the battlefields of Ukraine. I think Georgia is now much, much more on everyone's radar, more so than it was when it was invaded and did have two of its areas annexed by Russia in exactly the same way as they did. I mean, the Ukraine war was just out of their own playbook. You know, Chechnya, Georgia, this is what Russia do. Well, this is what they have been doing. Anyway, Georgia, once again, people gather in Rustaveli Avenue yesterday in Tbilisi to protest against the Foreign Agents Bill. It passed the second reading, as far as I know. Just moments ago, news came that the Georgian Parliament, supported the bill in the second reading. And then this continued. And you look at the size of these protests, says Jane Kiev in Tbilisi. Remember that the population of Georgia is only 3.7 million people. It's not a huge country in at any stretch. So to have this many people out and about, you know, being protesting like this, I think is incredibly significant, and it gives me hope that something might come about of this. People in the streets of Tbilisi shouting, so let's just listen to them here. They are shouting, "Glory to Georgia, glory to Ukraine." So he was shouting there. You could hear him just, glory to Georgia, glory to Ukraine, and everyone like shouting and blowing whistles and whatnot. The European Parliament has proposed to deprive Georgia of the status of a candidate for EU membership. This is one of these things where you're not sure which way to take this, that very delicate path of like push them away to isolate and punish them, or bring them in, and it's carrot or stick, right? This is the stick version, which is depriving Georgia of the status of candidate for EU membership. Such an initiative came from MEP Viola von Kramon after the use of violence by security forces in Tbilisi. So I've seen some pretty violent stuff that the security forces have been doing at a rally against the law on foreign agents. She also proposed to stop European funding of Georgia's projects, impose, that is a completely different thing there, projects, impose sanctions against Georgia's Grey Cardinal, Bidzina Ivanishvili. So he's the, is he a billionaire oligarch who is in charge of Georgia Dream, and ban entry for MPs who voted in favour of the Foreign Agents Bill. EU diplomatic chief Joseph Borrell condemned violence against demonstrators in Georgia and called on Tbilisi to respect the right of peaceful gatherings. It's going to be really interesting to see which way this goes. Protests against Russian law in Georgia are now extending to other cities as well. So not only just in Tbilisi, this is so important. If you get a mass movement around a country, then it becomes too big for the armed forces to do anything about. Here we've got Russia is trash theme is strong among Georgians tonight. So moving that big. The reason I show you that is it shows you that they all think it's, this is all about Russia really, and this is a move against Russia. They actually, I think it's that wheelie bin they took and they attached it somewhere, and it actually stopped a water cannon shooting at them, which is, here's another example. And why I love this is because of rugby, of course. These are people fighting for their country by scrummaging. So normally you'd have 8 people in a rugby union scrum, and you get down, you bind and go against 8 other people. Here we've got this growing scrummage. So they play. So what's interesting, bit of history about rugby. Rugby is actually quite big in Eastern Europe and Georgia, and it's because under the Soviet Union they actually took rugby because it's quite a very physical sport. It's like American football for those who in the States, but without any of the protection. And is very physical, and they used it in the police and the army to keep their guys fit and their aggression levels high, etc., etc. And so interestingly, you've got quite a big rugby scene in Romania, in Georgia, indeed a little bit in Russia as well. And Georgia particularly has quite a strong tradition in rugby. Anyway, someone here saying rugby, this is Georgie Revishvili saying rugby is our game, Georgians say. A scrum formed by protesters defending each other against water cannon used by riot police last night in Tbilisi. And I just love this because, it's great. And so they're all, that is literally, these guys are the scrum down and they all go in. It's absolutely brilliant. It is a proper scrum, and they're just pushing against that and all together, and it's just absolutely brilliant. So Georgians are, and they're just more and more. I feel sorry for the what we'd call the hooker. It sounds a bit dodgy, but the person in the middle of the two props at the front. That front row would be getting their heads crushed here at the moment. So nonetheless. There you go. So the Georgians are really putting up a good fight against the political direction that Georgia Dream are taking the country in. So Thomas Tyner says the people which now Russians best when Russians try to take over their country. So Ukrainians hate Russians, Finns hate Russians, Estonians hate Russians, Latvians hate Russians, Poles hate Russians, Lithuanians hate Russians, Georgians hate Russians, Belarusians hate Russians, and here we have Georgians really showing their feelings there en masse, and I love this. This is absolutely spot on.
We're still standing here after 3 weeks with all the power we've got, and this is our scream for you. This is our scream for you to help us, to give us sanction, to do anything that you can do, because our government is not hearing these voices. They're ignoring us, and we need you to appreciate us and to stand next to us, because we will never, ever be a part of Russia. We've been fighting this for centuries, and we need your help to make sure that we're never there again.
I think that's brilliant. Love it. Excellent. And oh no, that's for tomorrow. That's wrong thing, wrong place, wrong time, whatever. So hopefully something really positive comes out of these protests in Georgia. I hope that they don't get quashed. I hope this protest doesn't get quashed, that it gathers momentum and you can have some serious political change, so that the Georgian parliament represents the will of the people, who overwhelmingly, like statistically speaking, support moving towards the EU rather than moving towards Russia. But now, and the problem is that the Georgia Dream Party got in on a remit of moving towards the EU, but have like rather nefariously kind of changed their direction of travel there, squeezing out the pro-EU parliamentarians and moving more and more towards Russia, and not really representing the will of the people. So hopefully that does change for the better. I know this is a lot of me like banging on about stuff as ever, but the idea, the TLDR of this is that there is no such thing as a free lunch. It's just, if we remember that, then the question becomes, rather than the US or any other country, they shouldn't go around doing X, Y, and Z. It's like, what are the US or any other country getting out of doing X, Y, and Z? And is that a good return on investment? That's all we need to ask. Is it worth spending that? Is it worth going to that place? Is it worth doing that? And to answer, is it worth, you need to know the success criteria. We need to know, what your objectives are in doing that. And this is, going back to Ukraine, what are the objectives for any nation helping Ukraine, and then how do we best go about doing that? Which is, I think, there's a lot to be said about the Republicans who were asking for more clarity here. I just think it was difficult without knowing. There was a chicken and the egg issue with, well, we need to know what the Ukrainians are going to do, and the Ukrainians can't give you their strategy until they know what aid they're going to get. So it needs to be done almost together. And how are we going to win this? And the problem is, it's kind of been all a bit incremental and being worried about what Russia are going to do, whereas just we need to be the ones setting the red lines, and we need to be the ones dictating what needs to happen with regard to Russia. And we just need to be giving Ukraine everything that we can, because we have learnt surely by now that the Russians are full of hot air with regard to red lines. So we've got Lloyd Austin now saying you can have as many ATACMS as you want, type thing. As we're happy to give you lots of ATACMS, whereas before it's like, oh, no ATACMS, no ATACMS, no. So saying no to ATACMS for 2 years and then as many as you like, saying no to F-16s and then F-16s, saying no to HIMARS and then HIMARS, saying no to M777s and then M777s. Like, surely we've learnt now. All of us have learnt. Just give Ukraine everything they need to get this one, and that will be cheaper for us in the long run. Like, if we just give them everything they need, it's not going to be eked out for another 5 years, and the results will be better. The achievement of those objectives will be better. Whatever those objectives are, they are going to be something to do with Ukraine prevailing, winning, and that is best achieved with giving Ukraine everything it needs to hammer the hell out of the Russian forces. That's my tuppence. You can agree or disagree if you like, but do it respectfully, and maybe you might get a comment that I discuss. If that's what floats your boat, I can discuss your comment on one of these videos. Take care, guys. Speak soon.